Sean Diddy Combs has just filed a brand new bid to get out of jail before his sentencing in a few months. From arguing he shouldn't be locked up for his swinger lifestyle, to highlighting the atrocious conditions at the MDC, to addressing allegations of violence, he is fighting for his life in this new letter to the judge. Could it?
Buckle up, guys. Today we are going to uncover the shocking developments inside Sean Combs' world. The music mogul has filed a new bid for release ahead of his upcoming sentencing, citing life-threatening conditions at MDC. This isn't just another routine legal maneuver. The move comes after a violent confrontation that has left him visibly shaken. For someone who's spent decades controlling every aspect of his empire, the sudden loss of control inside a prison cell is jarring. Every corner of MDC now represents danger, every interaction a potential threat. Fame, power, and influence, once his shields, are meaningless within these walls. The legal fight has shifted from courtroom arguments to survival strategy, and each day becomes a battle against time. What seemed like a routine case has transformed into a life-or-death struggle, where every lawyer's word carries real consequences. Prison walls don't care about reputation, money, or history. For Combs, the illusion of control has finally slipped, and reality hits harder than any headline.
Diddy Combs be released from jail? I know I've asked that question before so many different times here on Sidebar, but we have right now a brand new request from his legal team, a brand new filing from his defense team arguing for why he should be released now after that monumental verdict in his criminal case several weeks ago. Circumstances have changed, and I will tell you what. We did an interview a few weeks back that kind of previewed why and how Combs could be released. It was a bail bondsman that is apparently working with Diddy's team behind the scenes. I'm going to get to that a little bit later. But what I want to talk about right now is this latest letter from the defense to the judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian. Remember, this comes after a jury of Combs' peers found him not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of 2 counts of sex trafficking, but they did convict him of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. He's set to be sentenced on October 3rd. Technically, he could face up to 10 years in prison on each charge. Highly unlikely. Think maybe you might be looking at somewhere to 2 to 5 years potentially, but he could also get time served and be released, although that also seems unlikely. I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But initially, after the verdict, right after the verdict, his defense team petitioned the court that he should be released. He was just acquitted of some very serious charges. The judge denied it. The judge denied Combs bail once again. And remember, this comes after he was rejected bail multiple times since he was arrested back in September of 2024, highlighting the severity of the charges, the violence, and so forth. But now, this is different. Now, what is the defense arguing? I'm going to go over all this in the new letter. I'm going to give my take at the end about whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not he will actually be released before sentencing in October. So, the defense begins by arguing that Sean Combs should be released in advance of sentencing, and the court has the power to do this. They have the authority, among other things, because you can clearly show, quote, that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. So, what are those exceptions? What are those reasons? What are those circumstances that are exceptional? They highlight several things that we're going to get into. That the charges he was convicted of, we're going to call them the Mann Act violations. That's what it's called under the law. They're not as severe, they're not as egregious as other convictions in other cases. That the sheer fact that he's locked up at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, for the past 11 months, that in and of itself is a reason for him to be released. These are all exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to get into all the arguments. But first, they highlight the standard, and they argue that to be released under federal law, you need to show 2 conditions. First, the district court must find by clear and convincing evidence that the person is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety of any other person or the community if released. Second, it must be clearly shown that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. Now, clear and convincing evidence is a lower standard, by the way. It's not like beyond a reasonable doubt. Anyway, basically, you have to show he's not a flight risk, he's not a danger, and you have to show there are particular, exceptional, unique reasons for why detaining Combs is wrong. We're going to start with the exceptional reasons justifying his release. And they begin by trying to define, well, what exactly is exceptional circumstances? What does that mean? And they argue that case law suggests a court has a lot of discretion to determine whether a particular set of circumstances qualifies as exceptions. And they say, look, Sean Combs, his case, so different from other ones. There has never been, according to them, a Mann Act prosecution like this one before. And this is how they lay it out. Quote, there has literally never been a case like this one, where a person and his girlfriend arranged for adult men to have...
After the jury returned its verdict, Combs was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking charges but convicted on 2 counts of transportation for prostitution. This nuanced outcome has created a new legal landscape. While some see relief in the acquittals, the convictions still carry serious consequences, and the defense emphasizes that circumstances have dramatically shifted since the original request for release. This isn't simply a repeat motion. It's a calculated appeal reflecting real danger and urgency following his attack. Sentencing looms large, adding weight to every procedural argument, every legal point, and every courtroom filing. The drama has intensified, transforming the legal theater into a high-stakes survival battle. Lawyers must now argue not just about law but about life, crafting a strategy that combines precedent, emergency, and public perception. Weeks of freedom hang in the balance, and every argument must underscore the stark contrast between past assumptions and present reality. This is where legal skill meets human vulnerability, and where reputation alone cannot shield a man from circumstance.
Focusing on this because, again, he was acquitted of sex trafficking. They highlight how the jury didn't find sex trafficking of Jane or Cassie, that it didn't occur. There was no force, fraud, or coercion that was used to induce these women to engage in commercial sex acts. For transportation to engage in prostitution, what he was convicted of, the prosecution didn't have to prove that violence was used or that fraud was used or threats were used. It was just, did you transport these women and men for the purposes of sex work, commercial sex acts? And obviously the jury convicted him of that. And they highlight all the jury found was that there was prostitution, payment of porn stars and escorts. And they highlight that he is a swinger, or under the Mann Act, a John. And they argue he doesn't deserve to be locked up for this. Quote, Sean Combs should not be in jail for this conduct. In fact, he may be the only person currently in a United States jail for being any sort of John, and certainly the only person in jail for hiring adult male escorts for him and his girlfriend when he did not even have sex with the escort himself. Over the last 75 years, the White Slave Traffic Act has been limited to defendants who cause interstate travel for financial gain through the business of prostitution. That Sean Combs remains in jail for being convicted of being a customer of consensual adult sex services makes this case truly exceptional. Not only is prosecuting the users of adult prostitution services inconsistent with the Mann Act, it's inconsistent with the prosecution policies of the district attorneys of Manhattan and the city attorney of Los Angeles, California, 2 of the 3 locations where this prostitution allegedly took place. In addition, Mr. Combs is incarcerated while everyone else involved in this identical conduct, his girlfriends, the cowboys, the agency leaders, the porn stars, and others, walk free, as they should. If there was ever a fact pattern that was exceptional under the Mann Act, it is this one. And then they move on to another argument, that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, as a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases. And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs here, is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate human trafficking offenses. And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts never would have been prosecuted. That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say if all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that. Anyway, the defense highlights how modern day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case.
Inside MDC, Combs was violently attacked in a sudden, unprovoked confrontation that changed everything. In an instant, the man who once controlled boardrooms and stages was thrown into a world where every step carries risk. Cornered and shoved, the assault left him not only physically hurt but mentally shaken, retreating into himself for safety. Prison is a realm where fame turns into a target rather than protection, and notoriety becomes a magnet for violence. This clip represents the exact tipping point where influence is replaced by survival instincts. The attack didn't just injure him, it dismantled the careful construction of his world, leaving vulnerability exposed. The legal team now faces a critical challenge, framing this real, immediate danger to convince the court that urgent action is needed. It's a stark reminder that once the walls close in, the rules of society outside mean nothing, and the fight to stay alive becomes more urgent than any lawsuit or fortune. Every second inside MDC now carries a threat, and the psychological impact is immense. The defense paints Combs' conviction as an extraordinary application of the Mann Act, arguing that he didn't profit in the same way traditional cases might suggest. By distinguishing his actions from typical trafficking operations and highlighting that others remained free, they challenge the consistency of the prosecution. This segment is about legal nuance, where courtroom strategy intersects with human perception. It elevates tension by framing Combs as a unique defendant caught in exceptional circumstances, emphasizing that justice isn't always straightforward. The narrative shifts from simply evaluating guilt to questioning fairness, highlighting how law can be interpreted differently depending on context. The courtroom dynamics show maneuvering, persuasion, and strategy, as lawyers navigate both precedent and human emotion. It's a delicate balance, presenting a man as culpable yet deserving of leniency in light of extraordinary circumstances. Combs' situation becomes a study in the interplay between law, power, and survival, offering viewers a rare glimpse at the legal calculus behind high-profile cases.
And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different. Again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing. And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District in another case basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility. These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs' detention at the facility. As the court is aware, during Mr. Combs' incarceration at the MDC, the facility was subject to an interagency suite that was designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. They're actually quoting what the rationale was. In other words, there is a significant issue at the MDC related to the safety of employees and incarcerated individuals that require outside law enforcement action from multiple agencies to address. Importantly, MDC, as a jail, has a significant law enforcement presence within its walls 24 hours per day that are equipped with investigatory and often unregulated authority. Thus, the requirement of outside law enforcement agencies to ensure safety within the MDC is an admission that serious violence, mayhem, and chaos is occurring within the MDC that requires more than a Band-Aid raid, but rather surgery. Indeed, we are aware of ongoing threats of violence and actual violence in the facility such that Mr. Combs' safety is constantly at risk. And they go on to argue, though Mr. Combs has been a model inmate for his nearly year-long period of confinement, the violent conditions are still very much a concern for Mr. Combs and is an unnecessary confinement risk given the clear precedent of multiple similarly situated Mann Act convictions where defendants were released on conditions. Now, the government, by the way, would probably disagree with that statement of him being a model inmate. Remember when they accused Combs of trying to arrange three-way phone calls and buying the use of other inmates' phone privileges to try to make sure the government wasn't listening in, that he was having these private conversations, that he was allegedly trying to contact witnesses in the case, that
MDC is depicted as chaotic, unsafe, and violent, a place where routine life is disrupted by unpredictability. Lockdowns, delayed medical attention, and constant threats illustrate a facility that is unsafe even for high-profile inmates. Protective custody offers little comfort, isolating Combs further and amplifying his fear and anxiety. Each day in MDC chips away at mental stability, stripping away the confidence and authority he once wielded effortlessly. Reports highlight the psychological strain, paranoia, sleepless nights, and constant hyper-awareness dominate his life. The defense uses these conditions to argue that continued incarceration poses not just legal risk but a genuine threat to health and safety. Survival becomes the central theme. Every decision must account for the reality that, in prison, influence and fame are powerless shields. This segment underscores the urgency of his legal team's efforts, demonstrating how extreme conditions require equally extreme legal intervention. It's a stark reminder that incarceration can inflict trauma that extends far beyond the sentence itself, reshaping the man inside the cell.
To help his public image while he was locked up. So if we hear a government response, I'm sure they're going to say something about that. Then the defense highlights he's not a risk of flight, he's not a danger to the community, which, by the way, I think are real key points here. But they seem to echo a lot of the same arguments that they have already stated to the court. And remember, they haven't been successful in the past. That he voluntarily came to New York last year to surrender himself to authorities, that he gave up his passport to his attorneys 6 months before his arrest, paid off his mortgage on his Miami home so it was free and clear for him to stay at while out on bond. He was just acquitted of the most serious charges that he was facing, which, by the way, carried decades, if not life in prison, that he's not a risk of flight. That's the basic argument. Now, when it comes to the danger argument, that is key. Why? Judge Subramanian had said after the verdict that the reason he was denying bail was because of Combs' violence, that his own attorneys admitted he was violent during the course of the trial. Well, here is what Combs' defense attorneys argue about that. Quote, the court noted that the defense admitted a history of domestic violence as to Miss Ventura and that he struck Jane twice in June 2024. However, we strenuously object that Mr. Combs poses a danger to the community, aside from a single instance on June 18, 2024, where Mr. Combs was provoked by Jane through her own acts of violence. There was no evidence of any acts of violence in the last 7 years. Indeed, the jury notably rejected the government's argument that the June 2024 incident constituted coercion when it acquitted Mr. Combs of the sex trafficking charge. Also, prior to his arrest in this case, Mr. Combs enrolled in a domestic violence program in which he participated until he was arrested and incarcerated in connection with this case. If released on conditions, Sean Combs will not be violent to anyone. As we said in court, this jury gave him his life back, and he will not squander his second chance at life, nor would he do anything to further jeopardize his 7 children not having a father and 4 of his children not having a parent at all. The court can fashion any set of conditions, and Mr. Combs will abide by any condition to make the court comfortable that Mr. Combs will not be violent toward any person. And that is when they proposed the following bail package: that Combs will sign a $50 million bond secured by his home in Miami, that the bond will be co-signed by 3 financially responsible people, that Combs will reside in his home in Miami, that his travel will be limited to the Southern District of Florida, the Southern District of New York for attorney meetings, as well as airports that are necessary to travel between the two, that he will be placed under the express supervision of the U.S. Pretrial Services Agency, that he will report to that agency as directed, that his passport will be surrendered to pretrial services, that he shall not apply for any other passport. And they even highlight that the court can add other conditions too: home detention, private security approved by the court, mental health treatment. He'll agree to it all. Now, let me tell you, we kind of previewed that this all would happen, this argument would happen, this new bail package would be presented when we spoke a few weeks ago to renowned bail bondsman, to the celebrities, by the way, to the stars, Ira Judelson, who apparently had been working with Combs' team behind the scenes on working to secure his release. Here's what he said about a new package after the verdict.
When Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package and by the way, is this a bail package that you...
Eagle Team presents a robust bail package designed to address the court's concerns while ensuring his safety. The $50 million bond, strict travel limits, home detention, private security, and mental health provisions reflect the lengths they are going to protect him. This isn't just about money, it's a demonstration of a structured plan to mitigate flight risk and safeguard physical and psychological well-being. The clip highlights the painstaking detail of legal strategy, from ensuring compliance with court conditions to convincing authorities of the reality inside MDC. Every measure signals that his team is not only arguing for release but demonstrating responsibility and accountability. The tension between survival inside and hope outside is palpable, showing how desperate circumstances require creative legal maneuvers. This segment illustrates the interplay between legal acumen, human vulnerability, and strategic persuasion, a high-stakes negotiation where every condition can tip the scales. The fight for freedom is no longer hypothetical, it is immediate, tangible, and critical.
Was a direct result of money that they gleaned from innocent people. Those are the cases, or narcotics. We see this all the time in narcotics cases where but it's the same principle. All the things that they have are a result of narcotics profits, right? So when you look at one of those cases, you're seizing assets. Here we've got mansions all over the place. We've got planes. This is a very, very wealthy man who made that money legitimately in Bad Boy Records, in the music industry and in the film industry. That's how he made his money, and that is not a product. And that's where we come full circle to this square peg and round hole regarding a RICO theory on this. The money, he didn't make any money from the freak-offs. He didn't make any money from all of the alleged things he did. He didn't make any money from that horrible video that we saw where he's beating Cassie in that hotel. That's not the source of his income. So I think, again, I don't think that the feds or even the court, I don't think the court would look kindly on that. And there's an old adage in the law that you and I've talked about before: bad facts make bad law, right? And if they run around and try to seize a bunch of stuff based on this, they're literally taking assets from a citizen that earned them legally. He may be a villain, he may be a bully, he may be a horrible person, but he made that money legally. He was not charged here with tax fraud, which means he paid taxes on it. He had accountants, he put it all together. So I don't see this judge. I think it'd be a very poor move if they try to take a bunch of his stuff. I think that they still have to create a nexus between the Mann Act violations and his property, and I just don't see it.
I don't see it. Okay, well, he might need the money. Why? Because he's got a plethora of civil lawsuits that he's facing now. By the way, in fact, Tenny Garagos had something to say about that yesterday.
Sean Combs has not sexually assaulted anybody. I've been saying this for months. We've said it with each lawsuit that came out, and today that was proven true. The media got it wrong about Sean Combs every single day for nearly 2 years. I ask that for every time you guys see a civil lawsuit, criminal complaints or criminal indictments, you actually take a look and analyze these and see whether or not these are actually going to stand up in a court of law, because today they did not.
So Sean Combs, he is facing dozens of sexual assault lawsuits. In fact, Vulture recently clocked it at 66 women, men, minors, drugging, sexual assault, violence. Matt, first of all, does the criminal case have any effect on the civil suits? And let me just ask you about this. You have at least one of the people who testified in this case who's a plaintiff, right? Dawn Richard, former Danny Kane band member, claims she saw Combs assault Cassie. Combs threatened her allegedly when she tried to intervene. She claims she was sexually harassed. So the idea of the criminal case affecting any of the civil cases, let's start there real quick.
Well, what's very interesting about civil versus criminal cases is when somebody's convicted, of course, in a criminal case, because the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, it's called collateral estoppel. It means that for a civil case based on the same event or the same actions, you automatically win the civil case. Okay, so in other words, we saw this with Mike Tyson and his rape conviction, right? When he was convicted of rape, because it was beyond a reasonable doubt, and because the civil aspect only requires proof to a preponderance, that woman.
Combs' world unravels completely. Fear, isolation, and humiliation dominate his daily existence, eroding wealth, power, and influence. Every moment becomes a mental battle, where paranoia, anxiety, and desperation constantly challenge his resolve. The attack he suffered was more than physical, it was a psychological tipping point, shattering confidence and forcing reflection on vulnerability. Viewers witness a man stripped bare, confronting an environment that shows no mercy, testing both his body and mind. The defense continues to push for release, emphasizing the human cost of continued incarceration. Each passing hour underscores the urgency. The question remains whether he can survive the environment or his own unraveling. The clip closes with a chilling reality check, leaving audiences to wonder what comes next. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.